So today I'm going to share with you something that I did recently that I thought was crazy and amazing and unbelievable, really. I was watching this documentary. I believe that it's on Hulu. I think it's called Three Identical Twins. I was going to look at the title, but of course I forgot. But it was about a study that was done in New York City by a prominent psychologist who separated twins and triplets when they were born and put them into different families that were kind of a controlled environment because they knew about the families, they knew about the siblings because all their siblings had been adopted too, and they were all the same age and the same gender. And what they did was they were looking at does your genes matter, or does the environment that you grow up in matter more? And obviously, it's a horrifying study because I can't imagine being separated from my brothers or sisters. But to have an identical twin who, if you've ever been around twins, you know the way that they interact and communicate. It's almost like they're like a reflection of themselves, right? So to not be able to grow up with somebody who is so close to you seems completely horrifying. And this study was done in I think it started in like the late 50s and it concluded in 1980 because some of the twins found out what had happened. So obviously the study was not a good thing to do. And it's not something that I hope would ever be repeated. I think that people would look at the ethics of that and say, hey, that's not something that you should really be doing. You're messing with people's lives and that's not okay. The documentary was interesting because it was talking about there were a set of triplets, 3 boys that were separated when they were like 6 months old. And one of them was sent to live with an affluent family. One of them was sent to live with a middle-class family. And one of them was sent to live with a working-class family. So all 3 of them had different circumstances. And they all had an older sister who was like 3 years older than them, I think, who was also adopted. And then basically the person running the study spent almost 20 years watching them grow up and seeing how they were affected by their families, by the environment that they were in, right? And they knew some of the history of their genetics as well. So these triplets, their biological mother had a history of mental illness problems. She had depression. And had been treated for it, but they didn't know like how bad it was. And of course, the treatments that they had back then were a little bit different than what they have now. I forget if they said that she was in an inpatient psychiatric facility for a little while, but back then that was a common treatment for depression. So basically what they were talking about in the documentary is how the triplets grew up and how each one of them had problems with depression, and 2 of them actually spent time in mental health facilities because of their depression was so bad. And one of them, unfortunately, died by suicide when he was 33. So they were all reunited when they were 19. They found each other and they were looking at all of their similarities, and so they found a lot of similarities. They all had the same facial expressions, they had the same obviously the same voice, the same mannerisms. They smoked the same kind of cigarettes, they were attracted to the same kind of women. They had a lot of the same hobbies and were interested in a lot of the same things that all three of them were, even though they grew up in different families and grew up in, I think they were all in New York, but they were in like different parts of the state. And they all had different opportunities because obviously their families had different amounts of money. But when they first reunited, they were focused on all of their similarities. And so they found all of these things that were so similar about them. But then as their time went on, they started to notice some of the differences. And some of the big differences were things that what your parents teach you, like work ethic and coping mechanisms. And one of them had a father who was super supportive of his son, and he was always like cheering him on and pushing him to do stuff and just so excited for everything that was going on in his life. And one of them, the one that died by suicide, actually, he had a father who was very strict, I think his father was in the military, and I think he was in the military for a long time. And so he was very strict and very demanding and very rigid, and like, this is what you do and you don't stray from that. And so he didn't end up with a lot of coping mechanisms for his depression. In fact, he didn't have a lot of like the moral support that his brothers had, because his father was just so different than the other ones. And even the one that grew up in the most affluent family, his father was, I think he was a doctor. And so he wasn't around a lot because he was busy, but when he was around, he was supportive and he was there, and he was, supportive and kind of like a cheerleader as well. Not so much as the one that was like the great cheerleader. And the funny thing was, the one that was like the great cheerleader was the poorest of them. So the one that came from the poorest family actually had the best outcome because his parents were so supportive of him and instilled in him beliefs in himself and confidence and self-love and all of these types of things that are so important. And I thought the documentary was so interesting because even though the study in itself was completely horrifying, right? We can all agree that children shouldn't be separated and studied like that. And there's no way that a 6-month-old baby can give consent for something like that, right? But it was interesting because a lot of times we think that all of our problems in life will be solved if we just had more money. And we think that if we just had more freedom, that everything would be okay, especially when we're young, like sometimes our parents are incredibly strict. Sometimes they just won't let us do what we want to do. And sometimes, we think if I just had exactly what I think that I want, if I had more money, if I had a better education, if I had more things like a nicer car, a nicer house, all of these things, then I would be happier. That's everything that I need, right? And you see these studies and it's like, that's not what makes you happy. That's not the things that you need. And it's kind of like, I think they call it cognitive dissonance. It's like when you are faced with a piece of information that is contrary to what you believe, then you don't really know what to do with it. And your brain kind of like freaks out for a while because you have this belief, right? Of if I had more money, I would be happier. All of my problems would be solved. If I had a nicer car, if I had a nicer house, all of my problems would be solved. Everything would be better, right? That's your belief. And then you see this study that says money doesn't make you happy. And you're like, oh, I feel like Gabby from Desperate Housewives, which was one of my favorite shows. There was a line on the show one time where somebody told her that money doesn't make you happy. And she was like, that's just a lie that we tell to poor people to keep them from rioting. And I'm like, yes, that makes sense, right? But then you see all of these studies and they're like, no, money really doesn't make you happy. It's all of these other things in life that make you happier. There are other ways that you can be fulfilled that are so much better. Even if you had all the money in the world, you could still have depression. Even if you had all the money in the world, you can still have anxiety. Even if you have a nice house and a nice car, you can still feel lost and disconnected, and you can still be lonely, and you can still feel not understood. In fact, it might even be worse, because then you have all this guilt of like, I should be happy, but I'm not happy. That was the way it was for me when I was in this job that at the time I would have told you was my dream job, right? And so I should have been happy. I worked 10 years to get that job, and I was doing everything that I said that I wanted to do. And then I was incredibly miserable. And so I would call my parents and my friends, and I would want to complain, because I was miserable. And they didn't want to hear it. They would tell me things like, you're just living the dream and you shouldn't be complaining. Like you should be happy. And so then not only did I feel miserable and lonely and completely disconnected from everything that made me feel good, I also felt guilt on top of all of that. And I felt shame, because it was like, maybe I just don't know how to be happy. Maybe that's the problem. That even if I have everything that I want, I don't know how to be happy. And as terrible as that was to go through, I don't wish anybody to have to go through that. It was actually the thing that I needed that got me started looking for understanding and for, what is happiness and where do you get it from? Where does it come from? That was when I found my personality type, and I found so much understanding in that. There'd never been anybody in my life that told me that it was okay to want to stay at home rather than go out with my friends. In fact, it had always been a huge problem that I didn't have a lot of friends. And that was always something that was like, this needs to be fixed. And I got to a point, especially after I found out my personality type, I was like, why does it need to be fixed? Maybe I'm one of those people who just has 3 friends, and that's totally fine. And maybe those 3 friends all live in a different state than I do. Some of them live in a different country, and I don't need to see them all the time. If I want to see them, we can jump on Zoom or FaceTime, or we can just text, and that's totally cool too. One of my friends used to send me voice messages, and I was like, this is super weird, but then it's also really cool because you feel more connected, right? And then since the pandemic has happened, people are more comfortable now with like video calls and Zoom calls. And as much as I hate being on video, which I do a lot, it feels so much better to be able to see people, to connect with them, right? But the whole point of this video, the whole point of what I'm saying is that it matters so much, the people that are around you in your life. Obviously, genes are important. I realized that from the documentary, from the study that they did. I feel like doctors and psychologists, they're always going to be this question of like, is it nature or nurture? Like, what's more important? But I think it's also important to say, just because your genes are a certain way, because your family is a certain way, that doesn't mean that you are doomed to be that same way. A lot of people in my family have depression. Pretty sure that both of my parents have had it. Positive that at least one set of my grandparents had it. And a lot of them had self-destructive behaviors as a coping mechanism. There were a lot of alcoholics in my family. That was the way that they coped. That was all that they knew how to do. It's what their parents did before them and what their parents did. And so that was like a learned coping mechanism. It was just what you did. And I've seen so many people. I watched, my dad was an alcoholic. Thankfully, he's not anymore. But I watched my siblings go down that road. I watched a lot of my friends do that. And I was like, I'm not going there. I know I have an addictive personality. I'm totally addicted to caffeine and sugar, and I know how hard it is to stop doing that. So why would I want to be addicted to anything else? Like cigarettes and alcohol. It's like, I'm not doing that. But, I have other coping mechanisms too. I have an eating disorder, which is a coping mechanism for depression. And that's difficult enough to deal with in itself, without having anything else on top of that. So I think that it's important, the choices that you make. So like I was saying, you can have a certain set of genes, like maybe everybody in your family has depression, but that doesn't mean that you have to deal with it the same way that they did. Maybe you're still going to get it, but that doesn't mean that you have to go down the same road that they did. And just because your family didn't teach you the right type of coping mechanisms, maybe they weren't supportive like they should have been. Maybe your parents aren't cheerleaders. Maybe they're not supportive of what you do. That's okay. They're probably doing the best that they know how to do with what they were taught. That doesn't mean that it has to end there or that you have to do the same thing that they did. You can break the habit. You can break that learned behavior, and you can say, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to learn how to be supportive. And in the beginning, it's going to be super weird because my parents are more like realistic than supportive most of the time. And so when there's like some of the podcasters that I like to listen to are like these super cheerleading, supportive type of people, and they have these phrases like Ruth Soukup says, do it scared. And, Glennon Doyle says we can do hard things, and I love those sayings, but for me, it's like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be like happy and supportive and positive. And it's taken me like 3 years of having a blog and a podcast and doing these types of videos to be like, I can break the habit, I can choose something different than what my parents did, and I can be happier than what they were. I don't have to be miserable. I can be happy. And it feels weird in the beginning, right? Because you listen to all of these people and they're like, you can be happy. And you're like, I've never been a happy person. I've always been like a realistic person. I've always been one of those people who's like, I'm not happy unless I have 5 things to complain about. And most people think it's funny, but it used to be like so true. Like, it reminds me of the TV show Frasier. I don't know if you guys ever watched it, but Frasier and his brother Niles, they used to go out to dinner and they would go to these fancy, lavish dinners, right? And when they would come home, their dad, who was like this retired police officer, was more like this, down-to-earth type of guy. And so they would come home and their dad would ask them, like, how was dinner? And one of them would say, like, oh, it was fine except for one minor problem. And their dad was like, oh, just how you like it, so you have something to complain about. That was definitely me, except I didn't want one problem. I wanted like 4 or 5 problems. I wanted a whole bunch of things to complain about. So it's different, when you're first trying to be happy, when you first decide, okay, I'm not going to be miserable for the rest of my life, it's like this weird thing. I remember when I went to counseling, it took me a long time to decide that I needed help, that I couldn't just keep going by myself. And when I went to counseling, I used to sit in my counselor's office and just cry. Like every single time I went, I would cry. And I told her one time, I was like, I don't think that this is helping, and I don't think that I'm going to get better. I think I'm just going to be sad and miserable, and almost like numb is how you feel when you have depression, like overwhelmed and numb at the same time. It's super weird. But I told her, I'm like, I don't think that I'm going to get better. I think it's just going to be like this forever. And she's like, I know that you are going to get better. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? You don't really know that. And she's like, I have had so many people sit in the same chair that you're sitting in who have felt the same way, who've told me the same thing, and they get better. Every single one of them gets better. So of course you're going to get better. And just because you feel really bad right now doesn't mean that you're always going to feel that way. Now, I don't know why it was like that thing. It was that information that gave me so much hope. That was like, there are people who came before you that felt the same way. And it was like, are you serious? Because I was positive that it was just me. I was positive that I was the only one who felt this way and that nobody else has ever felt that way. And the counselor just saying, no, there are other people who feel this way. And just because they don't talk about it doesn't mean that they don't feel it. And I was like, dang, why don't people talk about it? I mean, there's just so much stigma around feeling bad. There's so much stigma around depression and anxiety. And there's just such a fear of when you raise your hand and say, hey, I have depression, that people are going to be like, oh my God, you need to go to like a psych ward. And I was scared of that too. Like when I was going to the counselor's office, I'm like, I don't want to tell you this because I'm scared that you're going to like call the ambulance and ship me off somewhere. And she's like, why would I do that? And I'm like, I don't know. Isn't this like really bad? And she always told me, like, we're not going to ship you off somewhere unless you're going to hurt yourself. Why would we do that? You're perfectly fine taking care of yourself. You just need some support. You just need somebody to tell you that it's going to be okay. And you need to learn some coping mechanisms that are healthy. And then you need to start the healing process. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that was how it worked. I didn't know that there was a set of things that you can do that will heal this problem that you have. I didn't know that there was a path to being happy. I didn't know that there was like a way that I could overcome all of these things. And it really took me a while to say, wait a minute, I can be happy. And then going down this road of like figuring out my personality type and learning about all of the things that I've been taught when I was young, then I started learning about energy and how you can change your energy and how even when you're having a bad day, like if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, you don't have to live in that angry, annoyed, terrible energy all day long. You can change it. That's been something that I've just learned in the last maybe 6 months. And it's massive. Because when I used to wake up like that, it's just like you wake up too late and you're rushing, which is horrifying because I hate rushing. And then it's always when you're late. Like I was late this morning and I always go get coffee. Even though I work from home, I go to Starbucks and get coffee. And it's always when you're late that somebody pulls out in front of you and decides to go slow. And it's like, I'm already angry and frustrated and upset, right? I'm already tired. I already can't think very well because I don't have my coffee yet. And why are you doing this like right now? And then for some reason I had a headache. I don't know why I woke up with this weird headache today. So it was just like all of this like negative bad energy. And I was just feeling so icky. Like, I don't want to feel like this. And it's almost like you want to yell and scream and throw huge fits, which I don't usually do. I'm usually pretty calm and chill. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? How do I fix this? And in the past, it would have just been like, okay, I'm just going to yell at everybody today and be mad and not get anything done and suffer through it and hope that I wake up tomorrow better. And that's kind of like a really difficult strategy because how many days have you almost lost? How many days have you just suffered through because you were in a bad energy and you didn't know how to change it? For me, meditation has made such a huge difference, because now when I'm feeling that way, it's like, okay, I have several guided meditations that I do, and I can be like, you know what? Today is a gratitude day. Today is an affirmation day. Today is just, maybe there's like this one that's like a clearing energy type of thing that helps you focus on something else. And you notice that when you're done, and it's only like 5 or 10 minutes, you notice that when you're done, you feel totally different. And you're ready to step into a different energy. It's like your energy changes while you're listening to it. And then you're like, okay, I'm not angry anymore. I'm good. I can be happy. One of the affirmations, some of the things, the ones that I listen to, the meditations, are from Gabby Bernstein. And one of them, I forget which one it is, but she says things like, all is well. And I didn't know that I needed to hear that until I heard it. And it's helped me so much because I have a lot of anxiety. I think a lot of INFJs do. We have like this high level of anxiety. We need a lot of control in our lives, right? Because there's so much that we can see that is out of our control. So sometimes when my anxiety is sort of skyrocketing, that phrase pops into my head now, like, all is well. You don't need to live in this frenzied, worried, just negative place. You know, there's a lot of marketing and a lot of news that is really honestly fear propaganda. And it gets you into this energy that is, you just feel like you're scared all the time. And you feel like you're on edge, that you just can't even settle into anything. You can't focus on anything. And one of my coping mechanisms when I feel that way is just like sitting on the couch and scrolling through social media. And I've noticed that that makes me feel worse, usually. So having something else, having like these meditations that I can go to in that time that will change it. And then not only just the 5 to 10 minutes a day that I do them, but also remembering those things throughout the day. So when I feel those terrible feelings, you know, when I get stuck in that anxiety cycle, those things usually pop into my head, like, all is well. Everything's going to be okay. It's okay to be happy. I was listening to Kathy Heller today, and that was one of the things that she was saying. It's okay to be happy. And that was almost as much permission as what my counselor said, that like, people have come before you and you are going to be okay. But having somebody tell me like, it's okay to be happy, it was something that's so simple, right? But it makes such a huge difference. I don't know why we feel like we're addicted to feeling bad. It's like a sugar addiction or a chocolate addiction or coffee addiction. We get addicted to complaining, addicted to feeling bad. And I think a lot more people have become addicted to feeling bad in the last couple of years with the pandemic, because there's so much fear and people handle fear in different ways, right? Some people brush it off like it's nothing, and some people act like the world is ending. And I've noticed that even in my circle of small friends, you know, or my small circle of friends, I guess I should say, there are some people that are incredibly difficult for me to talk to, because every single time I talk to them, they tell me that the world is ending. And I'm like, this is a lot. Like, your energy is so negative. I can't handle it. You know, I just can't. I don't want to feel like the world is ending. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is ending. But I still have work to do today. You know, I still have groceries to get. I still have to go to bed tonight and get up tomorrow. And that requires me to go to sleep. And I can't go to sleep if I feel like the world is ending. It just doesn't work. There are other people that I talk to who were like, it's no big deal. We'll be okay. We're always okay. And that energy feels so much better to me. You know, I need somebody to tell me it's okay. All is well. It's okay to feel happy. It's okay to feel good. Valerie, I see you wrote a comment. I can so relate to what you're talking about. I needed to hear this. It is okay to feel good. Yes, I'm glad. I'm glad that you can relate to it, because I needed somebody to tell me that, and I hope that I've helped you guys too. And I just want you to know it is okay, that there are other people who feel the same way. First of all, that's incredibly important. And the second thing is that it's okay to feel okay. It's okay to feel good. It's okay to feel happy. You deserve that. We spend, as INFJs, we spend so much time focused on everybody else. We spend so much time worried about everybody else, trying to make them happy, trying to make sure that everything is good for them, especially if it's our family. I don't have children, but I have a niece, and I know that I spend a lot of time worried about her and making sure that she's okay. So I can only imagine how much worse that would be if I had little kids in my house. I would be constantly worried about them. I'm constantly worried about my parents and my friends, who are a lot like my family too. But we spend so much time, and a lot of us go to great lengths to make sure that they're happy and that they're okay and they have everything that they need. And a lot of times we put ourselves on the back burner, and we don't spend the same amount of time and energy making sure that we are okay. So it's important that we do spend that time, and that we make sure that we have all the things that we need. And a lot of times those things are things that we didn't actually learn when we were young. Maybe you didn't learn coping mechanisms or healthy coping mechanisms. Maybe you didn't learn how to be happy. Maybe you learned how to complain like I did. and maybe it's going to take a little bit of unlearning and then some relearning to make sure that you are happy and that you know how to handle the everyday stress that comes along, and then all the big stress, because there's always some new big thing to be worried about, right? So that's part of why I'm here, because I want to help you learn all of those things. I learned so much about myself. There's so much understanding that comes from from learning your personality type, right? There's so much understanding that comes from learning other people's personality types too. It's like if learning your personality type is like this key that unlocks this magical kingdom, then learning everybody else's is like life-changing, because knowing how to relate to other people ahead of time, I mean, it just changes everything. It changes how you communicate with them. It changes your understanding of them. It changes your empathy towards them. It changes whether or not you're going to be annoyed and frustrated with them. You can approach them with more understanding rather than frustration, which can change your relationships like crazy. I mean, it can go from night and day. That is incredibly important. And then taking care of yourself, being happy yourself it's also life-changing. I was telling one of my friends just last night that she asked me how I was, and I was like, every day is kind of like Groundhog Day. It's sort of the same. I work from home. I work on the same projects. I do the same thing pretty much every single day. I watch the same shows until I run out of shows, and then I have to go find another show, and I don't really like that very much. So for me, I'm also taking my own advice and leaning more and more into happiness and trying to find more of the things that make me happy. One of the things that really makes me happy a lot is being able to be here with you guys and to coach you and to help you feel better. That's why I like to answer your questions. I want to know what you're struggling with. I want to know what I can help you with. I want to know so much of what I've learned. It's like I know it, and so I just feel like other people know it. So a lot of the questions that I get asked are a lot of basics, which is good because I need to know that, you know, people don't know the basics, and you need to know you need to learn more about the basics, and that's perfectly fine. So that's why I ask people questions, you know, like, what do you want to know about? Because I want to be able to help you with all of those things. I'm doing a 5-day workshop next week. That's free. It will be at noon Eastern time, which is the same time that I've been doing these lives. It's going to be on Facebook. So if you haven't signed up for it, make sure that you do. It's called Here for This. We're going to talk about how to be happy. We're going to talk about how to get out of being stuck and being miserable and frustrated, and how when you want to make a big change in your life, how to actually be able to make those changes with confidence, and how to have more self-love too. A lot of these things that we've been talking about today that maybe your parents didn't teach you them, or maybe you've just been through so much in your life that you don't know how to feel good anymore. Maybe the pandemic has been really difficult for you and you just feel stuck and disconnected and you don't know what to do to be happy. It's okay to admit that you don't know how to be happy. Let me be the first one to raise my hand and say, I spent 30 years not knowing how to be happy. I thought that I was just a miserable person, and that was just all that there was, and there was nothing else for me. But that's not true. I've learned how to be happy, and it feels so much better. It really does. Yeah, so make sure that you sign up for my workshop. Again, it's called Here for This. If you go to infjwoman.com, you will see it on the front page. So go sign up. And then if you have any questions, send them to me. You can write them in the comments. If you're on Instagram, you can send me a direct message. I always look at all of my messages and try to respond to as many of them as I can. So yeah, I would love to hear your questions, comments, concerns. And tonight, 7:00 Eastern time, we're going to talk about my book, which is the INFJ User Guide. We are talking about chapter 10, I think it is, which is about communicating. So that will be good. Make sure that you join me, and we'll do this again tomorrow, noon Eastern time. I will see you there. So you just watched that video, and I'm sure you enjoyed it. If you want some more amazing information about INFJs, check out these videos right now. I'll see you there.